Hello again, fellow podcaster, and welcome back to Pod Theory. I am your host, Jason Cercone, and today I'm going to share 4 tips for writing stellar show notes. The beauty of podcasting is that it reaches people in multiple ways. You have your audio component, of course. If you wish, you can add a video component to your show that will give those guided by visual stimulation additional incentive to get hooked on your show. And then there's those who prefer written word. This is where creating stellar show notes comes into play. All of these items combined transform your podcast into a content machine that attracts more listeners and spreads your message to a wider consumer base. Now, when it comes to your show notes, you want to use this space to get your point across without writing a book. Show notes are designed to give listeners a preview of what they'll experience when they download your episode, as well as give them links to resources mentioned on the show, to different giveaways that you might be doing, to products that you want them to consider purchasing, or how they can support your show through a service like Patreon, and other places on the interwebs where they can connect with you. Your show notes will be just as much of a catalyst for growing your audience as your actual episodes. Let me explain. When people pull up an episode of your show notes should give them a reason to take the next step, which is to download and hit play. If your notes don't provide the proper snapshot of your episode, they'll move on. Additionally, if your notes read like a lengthy blog post, they may get turned off by that as well and bail on you. Here's something you can do to see how show notes vary. Look up 10 podcasts that you're interested in. You're most likely going to find a mix of approaches to show notes. Some podcasters will do long-form show notes. Others will be more brief. And some skip this step altogether, which is absolutely not recommended. Again, your notes play the role of movie trailer for your podcast. Without having to dive right in, a listener can get a feel for what's to come by checking out your show notes. And if they're written in a way that's appealing, the likelihood of them hitting the play button goes way up. In order to ensure your notes are treated with importance, here are 4 tips that you can implement immediately. Number 1, keep it simple, but not too simple. You want to be brief and to the point so your potential listener can quickly understand what your episode is all about. But you don't want to be so brief that you fail to showcase the content of said episode. My recommendation is this. Here's my recommendation. Do 3 to 4 short paragraphs of 2 to 3 sentences max. These paragraphs should contain keywords to boost SEO and summarize your episode in an informative, inviting way. Now, for reference, check out how I did the show notes for this episode. Number 2, write your show notes first. Writing your show notes before you record your episode is a great way to begin a framework for your show's direction. Most likely, you'll also be producing a script or a list of bullet points that you'll want to talk about on your show, or a list of questions for your guest if you're doing an interview. When preparing those items, include the first draft of your show notes. You may need to edit them to some degree after recording, but doing them first will contribute to the mold in which your episode is built. Number 3, be consistent with your show notes. Don't go from 2 sentences to War and Peace from one episode to the next when you're developing your show notes. Create a format that works best for you and stick to it. And when you create that format, be sure that you're mentioning your episode title and episode number in your notes as well. And finally, number 4, proofread. Before your episode and your show notes go live, proofread them for errors and mistakes. You know what? Before anything you post online goes live, proofread, proofread, proofread. There is so much content on the web these days that clearly isn't proofread. Don't be part of that. If you've written your show notes in advance of the publication of your show, take a day, then come back to them to see if there are any glaring mistakes jumping out at you. If possible, have another person look over your show notes for errors and omissions. 2 sets of eyes are always better than 1. This is your brand. This is your business. This is your creation. This is your work. This is your podcast. Be proud of it and represent it by proofreading your show notes to ensure they make sense. And that's going to do it for this installment of Pod Theory. If you like what you hear, please rate, review, share, tell a friend, tell a colleague, tell everybody you know. Pod Theory is here providing daily tips, daily strategies, daily commentary to help you build a better podcast. Thank you for listening, and please tell someone else to do the same. Good talk. I'll see you back here tomorrow. This has been Jason Cercone on Pod Theory.